welcome to Hardtalk India. Over the next 13 weeks, I shall be talking to some of India's top leaders and thinkers about the big issue of our times. And to start the series, the gentleman they consider the architect of the National Democratic Alliance government. How does he respond to the stinging indictment of his party's government in Gujarat from the Supreme Court? And much more importantly, how does he respond to the wave of terror attacks that India has been experiencing in recent weeks and months? Those are the two issues that I shall put today to my guest, the Deputy Prime Minister of India, Lal Krishna Advani. Mr. Advani, let's start with the Chief Justice of India's comments on the manner in which the Gujarat government has been handling the Best Bakery case. For many people, this case is in a sense a litmus test of whether those who were victims of last year's horrible killings will get justice or not. The Chief Justice said, "I've no faith left in the prosecution and the Gujarat government. You must quit if you can't prosecute the guilty." How embarrassed are you by that stinging indictment?
When the Chief Justice of the country makes an observation of this kind, it certainly has to be taken seriously. And I think that by responding to it, by telling the Chief Justice and the Supreme Court that they are willing to accept any prosecutor, any way in which the court thinks justice can be done, they have given an appropriate response.
In other words, you're saying the appropriate response by the Gujarat government is complete submission to the Chief Justice's views?
In a way, yes. Though I would think, as a person who has been dealing with problems relating to criminal justice for the last 5 years, that there are shortcomings in the entire system which affect so many cases.
Except that the Chief Justice's remark, which I quoted, wasn't a one-off remark. Commenting on the appeal filed by the Gujarat government against the acquittal by a lower court of the accused, the Chief Justice went on to say, even a counsel with 1 year's experience would not draft such an appeal. It's an eyewash and nothing else.
Well, the Gujarat government has made some amends for that by altering the appeal and doing what is expected by the Supreme Court. But I do feel that it's the entire system of criminal justice which needs to be corrected, not just one case.
You're absolutely right there. Because in fact the Supreme Court wasn't talking at the end of the day about one case. In what's come to be called as the Bilkis rape case, the Supreme Court actually said to the Gujarat police that they should keep off after her lawyer's alleged harassment. Clearly, the Supreme Court in all these instances expressing its perturbation, it's disturbed by the Gujarat government.
It is disturbed because of the incidents themselves. What happened in Gujarat could disturb anyone, and then when one finds that the offenders are not brought to book, that certainly creates a strong reaction. But at the same time, I am not able to attribute it only to one case. I have seen so many cases,
so what
case after case.
So what you're saying,
I would think that in a case of this kind, even while making these observations, the judiciary should have thrown some light as to how this happening of witnesses turning hostile, etc., how they can be checked.
So what you're saying is that the Supreme Court's comments may be damaging, they may be embarrassing, but they should be seen in the light of the wider system which itself is failing, not just with specific reference to Gujarat.
Exactly. In fact, I have seen cases as bad and which collapse totally simply because the system is such.
Then permit me, Deputy Prime Minister, to quote to you what Harsh Mandir, the country head of Action India and one of the most respected NGO heads, has written in the newspapers. He says this is a systematic, planned attempt to subvert justice in Gujarat. This is not a one-off. This is not the sort of thing that happens normally. It's deliberate and it's being done by the Gujarat government.
Even earlier when he made remarks of that kind, I had disagreed with him. I have seen the events of Gujarat very closely, and I am not willing to accept what Harsh said even earlier. So far as the Chief Justice is concerned, he is in a position where whatever he says has to be taken seriously.
Except look at the cases for a moment. 4,252 cases filed by the victims of post-Godhra violence, of which within 18 months, just 18 months, 2,107, almost 50% have been closed without the courts even framing a charge sheet. You know in India that cases can drag on for decades. When these close in 18 months, the speed is suspicious.
That depends upon the courts. Of course, it does depend upon how the case is prosecuted, but essentially it's a decision of the courts.
Except that if the prosecution is faulty, as Harsh Mandir alleges, and as all the papers seem to corroborate, if the FIRs are vague and fudged, if the investigation is shoddy, and if eyewitnesses are encouraged to turn hostile, then the state is failing to prosecute. The state instead seems to be taking sides with the accused.
I do not want to compare this particular incident or incidents that happened in Gujarat with similar incidents earlier and try to relate the kind of prosecution that took place earlier and what has taken place now. But again and again, I would emphasize that it's a failure more of the system, and I certainly do not accept that it is a deliberate subversion of justice.
Let me take you up on that point, that you believe it's not a deliberate subversion of justice, it's a failure of the system. Let me quote to you what happened in Sardarpura, where 33 people were burnt alive. If ever there was a test case, this is it. The Gujarat government appointed as public prosecutor the General Secretary of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. To many people, that is tantamount to handing over the prosecution to the defense.
I am not aware of this, but I am aware of the fact that a judicial inquiry is going on into all these matters, and that judicial inquiry by a commission, I am sure, would be able to identify shortcomings in the prosecution, in the government, if any, more precisely, than drawing inferences and general conclusions from specific cases.
Except, sadly, Deputy Prime Minister, this is not a one-off case that I quoted. The Indian Express on front page articles repeatedly has alleged that in 5 or 6 other instances, lawyers who are clearly associated with the Vishnu Hindu Parishad, who are members of their panel, are now becoming prosecutors. That in fact in Panchmahal, the district unit president of the VHP is acting as the public prosecutor.
Well, if in a particular bar or in a particular place, so many lawyers, almost majority of them, are associated with a certain ideology, you cannot on that account bar them from doing what is a normal duty.
Except for the
simply because one person is associated with this party or this organization, that cannot be a bar.
Except for the fact that you know better than anyone else that justice simply doesn't have to be done, it has to be seen to be done. Here people think they're seeing the opposite.
I'm conscious of that also. But at the same time, if you were to go to Gujarat and see what is the situation on the ground, you would be able to understand why, despite this intense campaign of calumny against the state government, why the people responded as they did in the election.
Except for the fact
that would only show that despite all that is being said in respect of the Gujarat government, the people do not subscribe to it. So and a large section of the people think that what happened is wrong, should not have happened, but at the same time, the government or the ruling party cannot be blamed.
Do you see this as a campaign of calumny?
I do see it.
Done by the Supreme Court?
Not now. I'm saying what happened during the elections or before the elections. I'm referring to that. And I'm referring to the outcome of the elections. If what was being said at that time had been correct, the people of Gujarat are not that callous and that inhuman as to support what was being described as virtual monsters.
Deputy Prime Minister, you were proud of the fact that once upon a time yours was called a party with a difference. That difference was the moral core. Today, you seem to be saying that it's the system, that worse things have happened in the past. You're comparing your performance with that of the Congress. Where's the difference gone? To many people, the moral core in Gujarat looks like it's become a moral vacuum.
Therefore, it is that I did not compare. If I were to compare, in comparison, this government also would come out very brightly.
You were explaining things away by saying that the system is bad. Gujarat is just another example. So under you, where's the difference gone? Gujarat under the BJP should have been a shining example of how India can be better, not how India just continues the old way.
The follow-up to Godhra was bad. But see what happened immediately after there was this attack on the temple in Gandhinagar. Everyone apprehended that something similar may happen. Nothing happened.
But come back to what I'm talking about. Charges that the Gujarat state government, which is in fact a BJP majority government, is acting in collusion with the accused to defend the accused. It is denying justice. It is subverting justice. Don't those charges worry you?
I do not accept it. If that were true, then this government would not have been in office at the moment, returned with such a massive majority.
You know what the Chief Justice said about that? The Chief Justice said in court, just because you won a majority doesn't mean you don't prosecute the guilty.
True. I
And
don't
that
disagree with that.
prosecution isn't happening.
I don't disagree with that. But at the same time, I do feel that the people are, when they decide about a certain government, they are not oblivious or blind to allegations of the kind that are being made.
Okay, you seem to be arguing that in fact the mandate that the Gujarat government got in elections in December somehow has changed the manner in which it needs to be now perceived. Let's leave that issue there. Individuals will come to their own decision about it. Let's come to the question of terrorism. 5 years ago you got elected and you said that you were going to put the tackling of terrorism at the top of the agenda. Your 1999 manifesto promised to make India terrorism free. Many people say that today, far from eradicating terrorism or even reducing it, the country has become more vulnerable. India suffers more strikes with more damage. Do you think that in terms of tackling terrorism, you failed?
When this government assumed office, terrorism was still prevalent to some extent in Punjab, though it was being controlled. But it had grown in Jammu and Kashmir to such an extent that people used to move from Jammu and Kashmir across the border, receive training there, receive arms there, and return back to indulge in terrorism, violence, sabotage, and all kinds of activities. Today the situation has changed to this extent that people do not go across. Very few go across. It's people who are attracted by the jihadis from all over the world, from Pakistan mainly, from Afghanistan, etc., who come across and indulge in terrorism.
Let me grant the point you're making is correct, that perhaps the character of terrorism has changed, perhaps even the causes. But the point I'm making is different. You promised to make India terrorism free. Far from being terrorism free, today India suffers more terrorism than it did 5 years ago. That is the common man's perception. Have you therefore failed in your promise?
That is not true. Terrorism has been contained, though incidents are there. You see Jammu and Kashmir. See the kind of amount of tourists who go there today. This year, it's been remarkably different.
December 1999 in your manifesto, October 1999, you promised that the safety and security of all citizens in all parts of the country would be paramount to the National Democratic Alliance government. 2 years later, December 2001, you couldn't even save Parliament from a terrorist attack.
Yes, that's true. That's true that Parliament was attacked. And that was, in a way, a phase of terrorism where terrorism went to the extent of 9/11. That it is shortly after that. So that our battle against terrorism is a continuing battle in which gradually we are getting ascendancy, we are able to control them.
No one can see that ascendancy. That's what I'm questioning. The country's perception is that it's more vulnerable than it was 5 years ago.
No, I do not agree with that. There is a great difference today, and therefore it is that I say that one of the touchstones of judging normalcy in Jammu and Kashmir, how far we have been able to contain it, is judging it by the number of tourists who go to Jammu and Kashmir today.
And yet, right at the very heart of Srinagar, when the Interstate Council is taking place, you're present, the Prime Minister is present, you have terrorist attacks that shake the country.
One single incident, and the people going around freely even on Dal Lake. There's a difference between that.
Deputy Prime Minister, let me remind you of the things you used to say. Hot pursuit is what you promised in Parliament. Every single terrorist will be punished. The Prime Minister even spoke about Aar Paar Ki Ladai. Those were brave words and they were applauded. Today it seems that the action that followed was timid.
How do you say that action that followed has been timid? After all, where else in the world, in any country which has been faced with terrorism of the kind that we have been facing for 2 decades now, have 5 persons, suicide killers, who had come here planning to enter Parliament House and massacre as many MPs as they can, have been frustrated in their attempt, aborted in their attempt, stopped outside the gate, and all the 5 of them killed.
And what retaliatory action was taken against it? None whatsoever. You lined up 1 million men on the border, you kept them there for 9 months, and you know what the country says? They say it was like the nursery rhyme about the Duke of York. You marched your soldiers up to the top of the hill, you marched your soldiers down again, but terrorism continues.
It's easy to make comments of that kind, but when you undertake a venture of the kind that was contemplated at that time, you have to weigh all odds. And I think we were able to change the situation to some extent, at least to this extent, that the leader of Pakistan who came here 3 years back and refused to admit that there was any such thing as terrorism. There is no terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. It's just a freedom struggle that's going on. He now doesn't say that. He simply says that there is terrorism, but I am not responsible.
But what a small achievement. All you've done is you've got the leader of Pakistan and maybe the American government as well to now accept that there is terrorism. But the terrorism continues. It hasn't stopped. You promised to make India terrorism free. Surely you now have to concede that hasn't happened.
It hasn't stopped.
Has it come down?
You may dispute it, but I do know from facts as well as statistics, it has come down. And if it had not come down, we would not have seen tens of thousands of tourists going to Jammu and Kashmir as they have been going this year. We would not have seen it.
Your party, Deputy Prime Minister, likes to refer to you as the Iron Man of the BJP. In many respects, no doubt you are. But do you really believe that on the issue of tackling terrorism, you've acted with iron will?
I think that the government has acted properly, and which means
not
that
strongly, but properly.
Properly, yes, properly.
What a concession.
No, I don't think in all matters it's rhetoric that serves the country. The country has to weigh every option, every possibility.
This is the man who promised hot pursuit on the floor of the Parliament, and now you are saying rhetoric doesn't matter.
I don't want to dispute you, but you go through the proceedings of the Parliament. I have contradicted this particular phrase again and again. As a man in the opposition, I did use the word hot pursuit. After coming into government, I have never spoken of hot pursuit.
So are you saying that the responsibilities of office have in fact changed your opinion?
Yes, it has not changed my opinion, but it has made me weigh every prospect, everything, I would say very carefully, cautiously, and therefore I can, with great confidence, contradict everyone who attributes hot pursuit phrase to me and remind him only that I had said it when I was in the opposition, not in government.
Deputy Prime Minister, in the last couple of weeks, 2 serious developments have taken place that many believe challenge the credibility of your government. The first is the Supreme Court decision to stay the privatization of oil companies HPCL and BPCL. The press says that this is a full stop to the disinvestment policy of your government. Perhaps it's even thrown your economic reforms into disarray.
I do not agree with that fully, though there have been difficulties created, but we are examining the judgment fully, and even after that, the first meeting of the Cabinet Committee on disinvestment that took place, undertook several measures
Yes, but
which
how
were
credible?
in the direction.
But how credible are those measures? After all, you've committed
They were
yourself.
small things. They were small things. They were not major things, but they were in the direction of economic reform. This government is committed to economic reform, and how do we respond to that judgment? We are examining it.
But you say this government is committed to disinvestment. You say that at the last meeting, which was in fact last week, you committed yourself to disinvesting companies like the Indian Oil Corporation and 6 others. But your colleagues in cabinet from the Samta, from the JDU, from the Akali Dal, from the BJD, from the Shiv Sena are against various forms of disinvestment. Will they let you go ahead?
We have done it in the last 5 years. We had difficulties within the government.
They forced you to postpone HP sale and BP sale
Maybe.
before.
After all, it's a democratic government. And then there too, it's a coalition government. You have to discuss it with colleagues and come to a conclusion. By and large, we have moved in the direction of economic reform, which has been satisfactory to all.
You say we've moved, but people say you've hiccuped and stumbled instead. Let me ask you a blunt question. Will we see major disinvestment in the remaining part of this financial year?
I hope so.
But you can't guarantee it.
Because of this judgment of the Supreme Court, several options are being examined in certain matters.
Will you meet your financial target set out in the budget for this year of 13,200 crore?
I hope so.
Again, you can't guarantee it.
I can't guarantee it.
What are
Certainly,
the
because after all, what is the law of the land? The Supreme Court pronounces the law of the land. And therefore, we are face to face with a Supreme Court judgment, which we have to find a solution for.
So even if you hope to be able to meet your targets, you do concede that the Supreme Court stay order is a major obstacle.
It is an obstacle.
A major obstacle.
I would not say a major obstacle, because we have considered several options we have been thinking of. But a Supreme Court judgment is not the weakness of the government. It is the law of the land. And therefore, you have to maneuver. You have to either circumvent it or find a way out.
So now you're caught in maneuvers.
It happens with every government.
The other event that in the last few weeks have thrown question marks on the credibility of the government is the decision of the Raebareli court to discharge you in the Babri Masjid case. Will the CBI be allowed to appeal against that discharge?
I'm sure you would appreciate that I cannot reply to that, because firstly, CBI is not with me, and secondly, it's for the CBI to decide.
But I'm deliberately asking you the question because you're Deputy Prime Minister, you're Home Minister, and many people believe that you might influence the CBI against an appeal. I'm asking you to clarify for the record that won't happen.
If I had tried to influence the CBI, why should this case be continuing when every executive government has the authority to withdraw a case if it wants to?
Mr. Advani, you're perhaps, they say, the most astute politician in India. What do you think the CBI should do?
I can't say.
Can't say or
As
won't
you see,
say?
I will not say. I will not say, because in this particular case, I have been exonerated by the court, and what the prosecution wants to do is not something that I am going to advise it.
Let me then put it like this. Were the CBI not to appeal against your discharge, the country would perhaps turn around and say that this was done with your personal interests in mind rather than with the merits of the case.
Unfortunately, politics being of the kind that it is, even without my saying a word, all things have been said and written, about which I would not like to comment.
So does it worry you that whether for the right or for the wrong, this is not just a test case of the government's credibility, people are saying it's a test case for Mr. Advani's credibility?
I may feel embarrassed, but I don't feel worried, because so far as this particular case is concerned, from day one, I knew it, I wrote it within 10 days, 15 days of the happening, that was the saddest day of my life. And a person who has conspired to do something and which has been achieved, why should he feel sad?
Many turn around and say the opposite as well. They say that once this case has been removed as it has, the path is clear for Lal Krishna Advani to move on to become, as he should have perhaps 5 years ago, Prime Minister of India. Are you now a candidate for that job?
I have never been a candidate for the job. I have never been a candidate for even being a minister in the government. And I think that this country has been very fortunate in having Mr. Vajpayee as the Prime Minister for the last over 5 years. And God willing, I am sure that next year he would get a renewed mandate and he would continue to lead the country for many more years.
Deputy Prime Minister, thank you very much for talking to Hardtalk India.